So I just want to say up front, thank you very much for having me. And I should also mention up front that I'm here to talk about the Center of Excellence from a non-technical point of view. So hopefully those of you who have decided to stick around, you don't mind the fact that it's not going to be particularly technical. I'm Douglas Hubbard. I'm the manager of the Power Center of Excellence at Transport Canada. And what we're going to talk about today is my presentation, if I can get it to work, of course, is all about how what we did is our Center of Excellence, the care and feeding of our Center of Excellence when the demand, of course, obviously always outstrips the supply. So this is just a very wordy thing where we're talking about what have we had to look after as a Center of Excellence, how we've had to deal with citizen development, how do we go to deal with the existing development community, rules and governance, all those things. And what do you do to make a good working Center of Excellence that supplies all of those things and supports all of those things well? I'll talk a little bit about Transport Canada. It's a federal institution for the government in Canada, unsurprisingly, as you can guess by the name, and it also involves transportation, but not the nitty-gritty day-to-day, are the buses running on time? No, Transport Canada looks after the transportation policies and the programs and enforcing the legislation for safe and secure, efficient, and environmentally responsible transportation, as we like to say, from coast to coast to coast. Where that can get very interesting for a country like Canada is we may have the second largest land mass, but we only have the 37th largest population in the world. Unsurprisingly, 90% of our population is clustered in the first couple hundred miles, if you like, of the US border. However, we still have to look after everything, including all the way up in the north, and we don't cover jungle, but we have almost every other biome, whether it's desert or tundra and everything in between. So there's a lot of complexities to look after our roads and our rails and our marine, because we don't even know how many lakes we have. There's so many of them. So there's a lot going on there. Now, what we're here to talk about, or what I'm here to talk about, and you guys get to listen, is the Power Up Center of Excellence, or PACE. We're closing in on being around for 4 years now. It's an organization that was created at Transport Canada after a very successful capital project I looked after, where Power Apps was used to build a very complicated system in much less time than I expected possible, because we had 2 acts of legislation that had to be enforced and the old systems couldn't do it. So because Power Apps actually worked for them, there was the question of could you apply this to other parts of the organization? So they asked me to lead PACE. We're going to touch on several different things today that I'm going to try and cover what we've done, how we've done it, that sort of thing. And I'll, in some cases, where relevant, mention the Power Cap maturity model. I'm guessing everybody in this audience probably knows about that. And if you are working in a Center of Excellence, it's a great way to see where you are. And I just want to caution anybody, if you're still working on a Center of Excellence, or maybe you're thinking about having a Center of Excellence, don't feel bad if you're starting at the low levels. It took us years to get where we are. And I'd say now we're between 400 and 500 at each level. So we're doing well, but it took us a long time to get there. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about our strategy and vision. When you have a Center of Excellence, the first thing you want to know is how big is your bread box. That may sound a little silly, or a little basic, but all this will be upfront with you. Nothing that I'm going to be talking about today is rocket science, or as someone in my member of parliament said infamously, rocket surgery. But I've also had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people in government in my country anyways, and some actually in the States. I've been fortunate enough to go to a couple of events and talk to people there. It's extremely surprising how difficult it's been for some groups to be able to get anywhere, to get their Center of Excellence off the ground, to get their first Power App in the organization. I think for us, part of the problem or part of the challenge is that in government anyways, this is going to be a shock to all of you because I think many of you are in Washington, government is a little risk averse. So trying to change things does set a little tremors of the organization. So what I'm talking about here is understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. How big is your scale and how big is your scope? Because you want to make sure you know what you're trying to accomplish, because you're never going to be able to make a good pitch to your executive if you don't. Now, in our case, the guiding philosophy at PACE has been, since the very first deck that I tried to present to my Director General, was teaching people how to fish. In that, I never saw PACE as being the only part of Transport Canada to know Power Apps, but we could be the shining example of the best way to do things and let people know how to do it. So hence the phishing model. I did mention this before, I apologize. Transport Canada has about 7,000 people in it. So that gives you a sense of where we are. Hopefully what I'm going to talk about here is of use to you in your own organizations as well, but that's where we are. One of the other things we had to look at very early on was, I say, mind the cracks in that understanding what are we going to do for the things that we aren't prepared to handle or didn't originally plan on handling. Power Up Center of Excellence, as you might guess from the name, is we're all about Power Apps. But we found out very quickly that that wasn't enough. Power Automate, in particular, is something that the developers were using in and out all the time. So it became, for lack of a better term, our side hustle. It was never really in our job description or our original plan I will say we focus on Power Automate, but there was no one else willing to look after it. We have an automation COE, but they started out being technology agnostic, and then they started embracing Appian whole hog. So they're really not interested in supporting Power Automate. So in this case, the crack was Power Automate. We've done our best to fill it. The other thing, of course, is avoid reinventing the wheel. This again is obvious, I know, but I just want to cover it. It's really important that if there's something already out there, whether it's a COE toolkit or whatnot, go ahead and use it. Don't rebuild. To me, that's really the philosophy of Power Apps in the first place, right? Don't build stuff that you don't have to. Configure, don't code. Now, if you want to have a successful center of excellence, really, in the end, it's all about the business value. What is it that you're providing other than a shiny new piece of technology? Present company excluded, I'm sure. I run into many people who are highly skilled in the technology, but then they get down into the weeds so far when they're talking about it, they lose sight of trying to explain to somebody who's responsible for their organization's budget as to why you want to invest in the product. So in our case, we were able to provide business value in two ways. Business value in that we saved the organization money, but business value in that we also provided what I call second order benefits in that we were risk reduction, which again, very important for government, but has value to every organization. A very practical example there I would offer is going back to that project I was talking about. By actually managing to succeed under the very tight deliverables, we avoided being unable to enforce two acts of legislation set by our parliament. So that didn't save us money per se, but it sure prevented us from having a lot of grief with a lot of cost, both political and economic. So I'm going to take a pause here so I'm not the only person you have to listen to. This is just a message from one of my director generals talking about some important questions, which were why a center of excellence and how do we fit into the departmental strategy?
Hi all, I'm Tracy Boyce, the Director General of Business Solutions at Transport Canada. I'm really happy to say a few words about our Power Apps Center of Excellence today, PACE. A few years ago, our team had CRM and Power Apps increasingly being used, but in pockets all over the place. We didn't necessarily have the funding to stand up a full program, and we couldn't really build it and they would come. So we started small with the intention to do some delivery and over time be more of a center of expertise and enablement. We took it even further to present a case to purchase enterprise licensing, which was really successful and enabled us to have more flexibility, more reach, and allowed for quick launches of tools like our FlexiDesk app that is used by employees nationally to reserve workstations on their mobile devices. Doing so also enabled citizen development for our staff. We brought in citizen developers into the Center of Excellence to help really understand their needs and to help develop their skills as well. Right now, while the team is still lean, less than 10, PACE is sort of split into 3 teams. We have our Center of Excellence, which focuses on monitoring, governance, nurturing the Power Platform, and Power Apps in particular. They work to standardize, simplify, and speed up security and architecture review processes. They apply and enforce standards and best practices for Power Apps development and really help and collaborate with citizen developers across TC as we have MS Teams PACE collaboration channels for them. The other streams we have are project and product delivery and product support until we can build capacity outside for people to support their own systems. With our development and delivery, we've really demonstrated the value with some cost recovery, but we've also launched critical apps quickly to meet really important departmental priorities. Our strategy now is to continue providing tools for our TC programs, in particular our inspectorate, and to continue enabling citizen developers. We've demonstrated the value of the COE, tangible benefits, launching in much less time, sometimes weeks instead of months or even years. And we've showed examples of where, for example, an airport inspection went from taking 40 hours down to less than 10 in some areas. This year, my team launched a regional revitalization program where we're going out to our regional offices across the country and resolving their issues, putting tools into inspector hands to address irritants and improve their experiences. We focus on reuse constantly and getting things into people's hands quickly. PACE is also looking at prioritization and governance, sustainability of our team, while continuing to grow that delivery and support team. We continue to work to harness the interest of program business users and make the most of the resources that we do have, as well as teaching and coaching Power Apps users across the department. We continue to share best practices as leaders in this space across our public service and with other organizations that are interested. We also welcome lessons and experiences from other organizations to keep learning and growing, and we continue to evolve. Thank you, and all the best from Transport Canada and the Power App Centre of Excellence.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we put our team together. Again, fundamentals, but it's really important to understand who does what. We went with a very, very, what shall I say, agile structure. I don't want to overuse that term, but there's me as the manager, and I have one incredibly helpful person who's a combination citizen developer and administrative assistant, really, and then everybody else is developers. Everybody is. We started with a team of 4 with 2 developers, the person I mentioned, and myself, and now we have, I believe it is 9 folks, mostly employees, couple consultants, and even that in itself is a success story, because one of the things PACE has done over the years is that we've actually taught people enough that they were able to become Power Apps developers themselves, and the best joined our team. So then, and I imagine this is a common thing for everybody, is where do you find the people to build the team? Well, you can always beg. That works if you're lucky. That was what I did a couple times to manage to get a couple folks. Borrow. I actually took some people from my other teams, the ones who showed the most promise, to build the COE. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of you can just grab somebody else from out there. Is it really stealing, though, if somebody comes up to you and asks to join your team? I don't think so. So I was very fortunate that, unlike most government setups, I didn't have to take whatever was available. I had the very great luxury of being able to pick the people on my team. If you have that opportunity, I strongly encourage it, because that's the way you build a very strong COE. One of the things we run into all the time, and this has happened even now, after all the years that we have put out Power Apps, all the years we've had the successes, is we still run into a lot of professional developers who are just not keen about using Power Apps. Coders want to code, I suppose. And some people have been developing in .NET, say, for 20 years, and they're really not that keen about changing. So one of the things we have to do constantly as a COE is work with our other stakeholders and directly with groups, including business, our business, the people who actually do the work, along with the IT people, to help them understand that really Power Apps is a great tool, and no, it will not steal your babies. At best, we'll just borrow them and then give them back if they're the cute ones. If you are building a COE or you're operating your COE, don't overlook the possibility of the folks that aren't from the traditional IT backgrounds. One of the best developers I have was the one I was referring to earlier, who started out actually as an administrative assistant, joined the team, showed a real penchant for citizen development, and has continued to grow to the point now where she actually is a member of the IT group. Great way to buttress up your staff. Oh, yes, I should also mention about from the previous slide is that I am also finding in general that the young and hungry folks who've just finished school, they're a great resource. Get them while they're students, have them in for a co-op term, see if they cotton to Power Apps, and then you might have your next entry level hire. Right, plan for growth. What can I say? We started as 4 people. The demand kept going and going and going with every system we built. People wanted more. So you want to make sure you're ready to go. I did have contingency plans. Fortunately, I was a little in error at the growth rate. So we've now got those 9, 10 people total, if you count me, on the team. And that's where I'm hoping to keep us to stay, because that's the most I can have is one happy Scrum team. And we're finding that that number of people, everybody is still communicating. We have incredible support amongst the team. And if we have too many more, I think we're going to lose that magic touch. Building bridges early and often. Well, one of the reasons why our COE has succeeded is because we were able to establish partnerships early on with some of the folks who are necessary to get things done. And I'm thinking particularly enterprise architecture and IT security. To put all that into perspective, our security group, I remember the first app I tried to put into the cloud, our cloud tenant, all the cloud apps to that point were unclassified. And I had these paper documents that I was scratching out unclassified and writing protected A in hand over top. But thanks to somebody in IT security who was very supportive, he was walking it all the way up to our senior management and getting them to sign, explaining that yes, it was okay to do that. And they were a little worried about again, we're government, lots of paperwork. The controls for certifying environments, they really struggled with the cloud concept. They couldn't say, tell me about your servers, like what kind of servers are you using, that sort of thing. They had to be much more flexible. But you know, they were very supportive, and in the end, we now have them working with us. Same with enterprise architecture. If you're looking at our normal approval process, it can take several weeks per gate, and we use the 5-gate model in our waterfall methodology. So you have an app that's done in 6 weeks. You may not even got to the first gate in the approval process under that structure. So what we've been able to do is, again, with their support, we've been able to establish guidelines, guardrails, whichever term you like, that within those parameters, the security is taken care of, the architecture is already approved. So you stay inside those lines, and you'll find that this is particularly useful for citizen developers. But the net result is very fast, very efficient. The approvals are often done secretarially, and that's because we have the buy-in from those groups. Sorry, excuse me, I clicked on the wrong spot again. Okay, so if you build it, they will come. I'm simply pointing out there that, again, I'm sure most of this is obvious, but it's worth covering anyways, because it all builds up to the same, it builds up all to the same conclusion, to the beneficial conclusion, is that if you start small and you build some successes, that will draw further support and success. Our first year was touch and go because I had such a small team. We did not have stable funding, but they came through time and time again. They built some incredible stuff. So sure enough, more funding came, more people came, and there we keep going.
If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the ACE team.
Anyways, that's, yes. All right, so let's talk a little bit about governance. We spend a lot of time, as Tracy alluded to in the video, about policies and best practices. I think it's an incredibly important part of any COE undertaking to make sure that you've got good advice and strong ideas so that the rest of the professional development community, or any developer really, knows what's going on and how to do it well. What are some of those things? Well, a really big question you have to ask for your COEs, are you going to be doing enforcement along with recommendation? We're trying really hard not to. Perhaps that's not something that everyone can have the same luxury. We already have in place enterprise architecture. We already have IT security. We're happy to support them. We're happy to give them advice, but we also don't want to be the police and the enforcers. So ideally, if you're in a COE, I think the best way to go about it is you want to provide the advice. Maybe you're at the enterprise architecture meetings, maybe you go to the approval meetings, that's always good. So that way, when somebody says they can't use Power Apps because it can't do it, or it can't work higher than protected A, that kind of thing, well, then we just act as the voice of reason and say that's actually not correct. Always important to have all the tools of the trade. And by that, I mean, we have so many things at our disposal, don't we, in Power Apps? Canvas, model driven, Power Pages, and that's just inside Power Apps, let alone the entire platform. So holistic view, really important to make sure you've got all of the options on the table, and then you apply the best one for the job. All that said, we're not using a lot of Power Pages because we've encountered a couple of challenges with it, but overall, still it's good to know you've got that repertoire. Right, speaking of tools of the trade, let's talk about the COE Crew Toolkit. We love the COE Toolkit, and that's not my being sarcastic. It's an incredibly valuable thing, and it reminds me of those Swiss Army knives they used to have with about 85 blades, attachments, and little dongles on it. You're probably not going to use all of it, but my goodness, it's a great thing to use. Use the piece you want. We are finding that the biggest thing that the COE Toolkit helps us with is that's how we know when somebody starts doing stuff in the default tenant. We use it to keep an eye on when somebody creates something, so we welcome them and introduce them to the policies. And then we keep an eye on how many people are using each app in the default tenant, because under our policies, you can do whatever you like in the default tenant as long as you're not using production data and it's just you. So if we start seeing 6 or 10 people in an environment, we have a chat with them, because we've had a couple groups that decided that yes, they should go to production without following any of the rules because there was only a few of them. So COE Toolkit, it's fantastic. Oh, I neglected to mention, we're pretty much at the 400 level for anybody keeping score with the Power Cat model. This is where we're at 400 at, I think. So we're doing all right. We're doing all right. Data loss prevention. Oh my goodness. Data loss prevention, that's one of those things that is such a fantastic idea, and we really, really want to use it. But funny story, we did our first pass at DLP by turning on in, again, that default tenant. The DLP settings are provided where only the ones that are set and the standard set under all those Microsoft extensions for Dataverse, those were the only ones that we allowed. I think it took us 5-7 minutes, and people started contacting the COE, complaining that they had problems with their apps. In the default tenant, mind you, there were over 2 dozen. It's almost 2 dozen. It was over 20 connectors that weren't on the standard list, and that's just in the default tenant. So we had to turn that back off pretty fast. And what we're going to try and do, working with enterprise architecture, is we're going to say we're going to have a start date. 6 months from there, we're going to put in our DLP policy. Right now, the only ones you can use are that default set. You have 6 months to explain to us why you should have something else. See how it goes. But given what you can do with those connectors, it's a really good idea to have DLP. This is probably, if I was going to be honest, this is probably the part that we're the weakest in right now. So we may not even be a full 400 on this part, but I'd like to think so as a whole. Right, okay. So I can only touch very briefly on the Copilot AI in general. Government, again, at least in Canada, they're really not keen about this. They're really worried about what it could do. Contra-wise, I've had citizen developers ask me a year ago, I swear, how soon can I have Copilot? Which sounds great, except in Canada even, we can't even use Copilot yet because it's still in trial and you have to have a US account. We're really not there yet. I know that people are excited, or at least less worried about some of the things for the Microsoft settings where you can keep it inside your own tenant and it doesn't go trolling across the internet and all that sort of thing. We're going to have to see how it shakes out. Personally, for what it's worth, I think it's going to be a very useful tool, but I don't think it's going to replace professional developers. And I'd also say that, at least in my neck of the woods, the biggest change this is going to cause is with citizen developers. I predict there's going to be an explosion of people coupling systems together because they're going to be able to use Copilot to build it even faster. Whether it's of top quality or not, and whether it follows our particular rules in our country about it having to be bilingual, for example, that's a different question entirely. So yes, professional development. Now, obviously you want your department, organization, pardon me, to be very good at professional development. But this was a question we struggled with, was, do you want to have development as a part of your center of excellence? Strictly speaking, your center of excellence, isn't it all about governance and policy and best practices? And maybe you're building some really cool things like a template so you can have Power Pages, have a compatible layout for everybody in your organization, but are you building apps? Well, I have to say, in our case anyways, while it's been very successful, we didn't really have any choice. Our organization was not funded for the first couple of years. And the only way I could get enough money to keep the lights on was to build things for people who had money to give me to pay for the team. So that was by needs must. And we still have a situation now where, I'll be honest, the majority of our time is spent building stuff. Does my team love it? Absolutely, because they're all developers. We do make sure that there's a certain percentage of time set, though, so that everybody spends a cycle. 20% is our minimum target. No matter what else they're doing, even if they're building an app, 20% of their time is built in to do COE work, whether that's responding to people's inquiries, something in the backlog, fixing a big problem. Either way, personally, I'd like to up the percentage a little bit, but we never have a lack of people wanting stuff done. So right now it's holding at 20, but at least I have more people now, so we're still getting a lot done. Right, so part of the fishing expedition, or where I was saying there about teaching people how to fish, is it's really, really important to, like the slide says, winning hearts and minds. We had to win over my executive. We had to win over business because, you know what, model driven looks an awful lot different than, say, their traditional .NET apps. And we had to win over, as I alluded to earlier, some of our professional development teams that really were not keen on trying something new. So one of the things we've done to win people over to Power Apps, particularly when we had a group that said, well, we don't have anybody who knows how to do it. So since nobody knows how, we'll never learn how to use it, and we're never going to do it. So there. What we've done is a term I call embedded developers. So PACE will get tasked to build an app, often for a group that doesn't have any capacity. And then we take a developer from their team and then bring them in to PACE long enough to work on that app. So what happens is they learn Power Apps, learning by doing, and they also happen to learn firsthand on the very app that their group is going to have to look after when all is said and done. So this makes us happy because I don't have to keep slicing off my team's time to look after apps. The manager of that team is happy because now they have somebody who knows how to look after the app, and we just spread more Power Apps to the organization. We've done this with multiple projects now, and I'm happy to say it's working really well. Oh yes, which leads me into this concept of don't forget the maintenance. We became a bit of a victim of our own success very early on because we kept cranking out app after app after app, fast, efficient, third the time and half the cost of other methods. Looks good, looks great. And now who's going to look after them? Now, fortunately, if you build the apps well, especially if it's model driven and you've eschewed coding as much as possible, so as configuration, the maintenance is also a lot lower. But a lot lower is not zero. So very quickly, I realized I have to start factoring in that I do need to budget for the maintenance. So, don't make the mistake I did. Remember right at the outset, if you're building a bunch of apps and all the other groups in IT are not obliging to take them from you immediately, don't forget to factor in the maintenance for your COE group. Oops, I'm not going to do that one because they're not here. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit. That one, I think we're at a 5, by the way. That one, we're at a full 500. Okay, citizen developers. You can always count on Gartner to come up with a really nice wordy bit, but let's be honest. A citizen developer is somebody who builds stuff in Power Apps, in this case, that didn't come from a traditional IT background. That's the long and the short of it. And we've seen a remarkable variety of people. I had 2 people from a mailroom come up with a fantastic app that they built in their own time, all the way up to somebody who was an executive director who built a series of interconnected apps for a toolkit. That sparked off our proposed marketing campaign to Power Apps so easy, even an executive could do it, but there was some concern that that wouldn't sit well with everybody, so we had to pass on that. Just like the professional development, is this for your COE? Again, being honest, full disclosure, when I first pitched the COE, I did not factor in citizen development. And then you know what? It started happening, and it kept happening, and it's never going to stop happening. So I did a rapid pivot, and short answer is yes, you'd better include you better include citizen development, whether it's your COE or your business practices, because you know what? It's going to happen anyways. Unless you're in a super secret area where you can literally clamp down on everybody, it's going to happen. They're going to get trial accounts, or you can set up a situation to help them. And this is where I'm going back to the risk and reward. There is no question that unfettered citizen development can carry great risk. Counter that with, you tap into all those people out there, usually, at least I've found, the ones who are real go-getters, who are really smart, who are really willing to work hard. That's an incredible resource to leverage your IT capabilities, because we never have enough. I always have more people asking for stuff to do than there's actually people. The old infinite demand, finite supply from those economics courses for anybody who took them. It's so true. So you got to go in with your eyes open, but you can really get a lot done. You can get a lot more things accomplished if you can get your citizen developers on board. So yes, success stories and cautionary tales. I talked a little bit about the executive director and the mailroom guys. We've had lots of engineers who've come up with some great apps to support their shop and aircraft maintenance and that sort of thing, because that is something that we maintain the fleet for the federal government. So when our prime minister flies around, we make sure the plane doesn't fall out of the sky, which is important, generally speaking, which is all great. So there's been a lot of successes, but I have to say we've also learned a few important lessons. One of them was people going to production without getting permission, which is now why we keep a very close eye on the tenant. We've also had people who started trying to build on their own and not falling inside the tenant, which is again now why we try to be as welcoming as possible. And then we also had, and I believe, we don't get to this one, I'll talk about it a little bit later, is that, oh my gosh, we had to learn about dealing with maintenance after the fact, which I'll get to in a little bit. So yes, this is what I was trying to talk about with the default tenant. We've done everything possible since we have actually enterprise licenses so everybody can work with Power Apps. We have Power Apps, I believe them called Power Apps Premium licenses now for everybody. So the opportunity is there to develop and unfettered development. You're not stuck with the standard connectors. You can do the whole thing. So we've set it up, that playground. We actually call it the playground, the default tenant. Go to town, folks. Try out your Canvas app. Try out your model-driven app if it's complicated, if you think you need that. Do what you like. Try what you want under a few rules. You can't use real data. You can't use it for anybody but yourself, and you cannot use Power Pages. Why can't you use Power Pages? Glad you asked. Because that would, by definition, be an external-facing site, and not to try and take away from citizen developers, but between the fact that it's external facing, meaning the members of the public see it, coupled with, let's face it, Power Pages is not that much far removed from coding together a whole bunch of HTML. It's simply too high of a risk of somebody being able to actually cobble it together by themselves without there being problems. Because we have to make sure that it follows all of the rules set by our government, and that includes not just accessibility, but it also involves usability and, like I talked about earlier, fully bilingual in both English and French. That is not something to take lightly. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do it, but they can't do it on their own. So that's where fusion teams come in. But we're finding this is working pretty well. We make it as welcoming as possible. As the joke goes, the first hit is always free. They get a chance to try stuff out. And then what we tell them is that if you actually bring in an application far enough along that you think you're serious about it and you want to take it to production, you come to Pace. We then set them up with their own development and acceptance environments. We give them their pipelines, nice automated pipelines, which, by the way, check for security vulnerabilities. And then we walk them through the approvals process. And then if they get approved, we get them a production environment. So it's helping us a lot to discourage the shadow IT. Right, fusion teams. We're having a lot of great success with fusion teams. That's where, of course, somebody's got a problem that they just can't do by themselves, but we leverage as far as we can the citizen developer. So far, anyways, we've done about a half dozen of them, and they've all been successful with one small rub, which I will get to, which is what happens sometimes if the citizen developer leaves. Right, and that's more on maintenance. And this is where we're finding citizen development is actually probably the most difficult for maintenance, because what happens is the same people who are so eager and so willing to build something in Power Apps to solve the problem in their business organization are probably the exact same people who can take a promotion and go somewhere else. So we had a couple of apps that were in production and the citizen developer left, and nobody else in the team even had the first clue about Power Apps, let alone how to build the app. So we learned from that. That was one of our hardest lessons, how to sort that problem out, which is where we now have, I call it here the Citizen Development Covenant, but that's a little bit grandiose. What we've actually done is we now have contracts. Everybody signs a contract, whether it's a citizen development effort, a fusion team effort, or a pro dev effort. By that, I mean Pace is darn in to do the whole thing. We clearly outline RACI matrix, all that fancy stuff. We say, Here's what everybody's responsible for. You sign before we start doing any work. And it's solved so many problems. We're upfront to people that take citizen development, for example. It's your responsibility. You own it. Congratulations. You can actually make modifications as long as you don't break any rules. You don't need to come to us to get permission. But if you need to fix something, it's on you to make sure your people know how to do it. So that if they only have one person who knows how to do it, you better make sure there's a second. But I think that's smart things anyway, smart plan anyhow. And if you do end up absolutely in the lurch, well, great, come to PACE, but we'll put you in the queue. We don't have anybody hibernating in pods ready to leap out to help you. If it's a fusion team, we say, you know what, if PACE built it, then yes, we'll look after the parts that we build. And ProDev, obviously, it's all on us. They're working really, really well. We've actually had organizations across, Government of Canada, pardon me, asking us for those asking for those contracts. So I think we're onto something there. All right, I think we have enough time still. I'm just going to play for a couple minutes. This is the wonderful person I was talking about earlier, but why she became a citizen developer and what does she do at PACE? And also pros, cons, and challenges.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton Studer, and I work for the Power Apps Center of Excellence at Transport Canada. I became a citizen developer about 2 years ago. And before that, I always knew that coding was something that I wanted to learn. I knew that the younger generation coming up was learning it in school, and it was going to be something that they were eventually going to enter the workforce and know how to do it. So I knew that I needed to as well. So when this opportunity came up with Transport Canada, I was so excited that there was a program that allowed me to be able to start building apps right now instead of waiting 3 to 5 years to go back to school to learn how to code and to really get my feet into it. So I was really excited that this existed now and I could start right now. For the PACE team, I wear a couple different hats. I do a lot of administrative work, which includes managing the inbox. I help assign licenses. And on the other half, I do some development as well. What started 2 years ago was I was just handing out licenses. I was facilitating the purchase of licenses as well. And as I was learning Power Apps, I learned that it was the perfect program to help me track licenses. At the time, we were using Excel and emails. It was hard to track. And I figured that a Power App would be perfect for helping me stay organized. So from there, I was able to create an application that really just helped me do my job better. And since then, I now have 2 apps in production, and 1 is currently in user acceptance testing. On the other hand, I also deal with some COE tasks. I help come up with the prioritization of intakes. I'm helping our managers deal with how we handle maintenance, and just help out people wherever I can. There's a lot of pros and cons and challenges that come with working in a center of excellence. The 2 biggest pros for me are that I have really close relationships with several technical advisors, which makes my job as a citizen developer a lot easier. I can bug these guys whenever I need help. And I feel like that has been a huge advantage to my progress as becoming a citizen developer and how quickly I've been able to create the apps that I have. The other pro is that some might describe me as having a type A personality, which means that I like to be in control when I can be, and I like to be organized. So being part of the group that gets to the decisions and be in control has worked really, really well for me. And it's given me the ability to have a say in where I think changes could be made that'll benefit our users. And that's been huge, especially from a citizen development standpoint. I think I bring a perspective that not everybody on the team has. When it comes to cons, I'd say the biggest con is development, and there's two sides to that. So when we first started the Power Up Center of Excellence at TC, we were self-funded, which meant that in order to keep the lights on, we needed to do development work, which meant that we didn't have a lot of time to do our COE stuff. That's not the case anymore. So now we have lots of time to do our COE stuff, but that also means that there's a little bit less development. And as a citizen developer who now understands the joys of development, this can be a bit of a con. I would love to spend all day building applications, but I also know that there's a lot of important COE stuff that we need to get done. And as for challenges, there is so much to know about Power Apps and just dealing with applications in general. As someone who came to this team with no prior IT experience, there was so much to know and not enough time to know.
One thing I will add before we leave this topic is that Ashton helped me understand, along with our first few efforts, that citizen developers and professional developers, one is not better than the other, one is not worse than the other, but they are very, very different. So you have to really be mindful of how to look after both. For example, our community practice, we try to have alternate between professional and citizen developers because their differences are very neat, very, very different. They have very great differences. All right, final step, last hurdle, the last one, finding the balance. Right. So we can be fancy and we can talk about the falconer and things falling apart from Yeats, or we can put it in more modern terms. In day to day, there will indeed be no rest for the wicked until we close our eyes for good. So fine, great, you're gonna have more to do than you want, but how do you deal with it? I'll touch again briefly about the maintenance part. Like I said, we were victims of our own success. We had made so many systems that it started chewing into our own resources. So I dropped back, punted. So now we make that part of our COE cycle. I brought in more people, and that's where the contracts also saved our bacon because it started laying out who's going to look after what. We still have a few apps in our portfolio, but it's much more manageable now. Perils of Shadow IT, talked about it a little bit. You've got to get ready for it. You've got to be ready to deal with it because it's going to happen if you're not careful. It is so easy for people to get trial accounts. They start building stuff, and next thing you know, you've got the exact same thing, if not even worse, than all those Excel spreadsheets with mission critical data sitting on a shared drive somewhere that IT knows nothing about. Or maybe that's just me, but I'm pretty sure you've all run into that pretty likely, right? This is where we're finding that default tenant, that playground being as hospitable and welcoming as possible is incredibly helpful. It's going to happen anyways, but at least this way we get out in front of it, or at least we know what's going on, which is so much better. Do we always solve the problem immediately? No, but at least we know there's a problem. Right. The mythical man month, pardon me, was done in the 70s, human month. This is why I haven't grown the team any larger than I have, because that myth, if you double the number of people on it, it'll get done in half the time. It starts to collapse under weight and administration. The single biggest thing I do is that I do all the paperwork and all that fun process stuff so my team can do all the development. I set up the conditions so everything gets out of their way and then they can build it. So find what is your sweet spot, so to speak, and try not to grow it and try to explain to people that just throwing more people at the problem is not going to solve it. Right, minding the sharp bits. We've all seen that triangle, right? The iron triangle, time, money, and people. Your scenario, my scenario, everyone else's scenario, something's going to be, it's always going to be different. But in the end, one of these bits is going to come and bite you. For us, initially, it was money. Then it shifted to people. Now I wonder if it's time, but it's always going to be one. But be proactive and be responsive and just try and support your team as best you can, whichever one's the worst at the moment. Right. In my case, it's people. All right, so I'm going to skip the message from Arena because we don't have a lot of time, I see. So sorry, Arena. That's my boss. She's not here. She won't know. So difference between proactive and reactive. You're going to do both. Let's talk about it. Proactive is ideal. That's when you obviously are responding, even if you can ahead of time, come up with a good policy, come up with a good strategy, set plans in place. Awesome, fantastic, good on you, but it's not going to happen every time. So what are you going to do for your reactive responses? All I can suggest is be agile and be ready to deal with things. So we have a proactive strategy in place, for example, to watch when something's going wrong with a tenant, and then we react. So reactive is not necessarily terrible, but don't make it your plan A, right? Just try and make sure that you have as little of this as possible, but you're still going to be doing it. Right, COE Toolkit is your friend. Can't emphasize this enough. Hope I'm not sounding like I'm just endlessly repeating. It is so important. This is the fantastic means in which so much of our proactive efforts are done with the toolkit. Learn it, love it. Intake and assessment. One of the other things we've done to try and bring order to the chaos is we've actually established a formal intake process where people fill out this form we built, answers a bunch of questions. The questions are key to what's been identified as departmental strategy requirements, and we give it a score. And then we tell people this is where you're scored, this is where you are in the queue, and we expect to get to you in X. Admittedly, not everybody's excited when they find out fourth in the queue, but they really, really appreciate having a quantitative, this is where you are, this is how we're going to do it, and this is why, versus they have no idea, are we playing favorites? And I'm really happy to say, thanks to the efforts of my team, our intake process does not include the question, can you pay us? We're helping people on need only, which is really good, because we've had some groups, because usually they're the ones that don't have the money, they have the oldest and most worn out systems. And the other thing too is that by using that intake system, we're trying to factor out the tech. So people talk about the problems before the tech. Factor in the big red button. My last ADM, anytime there was a problem, his solution, Pace will fix it. Well, that's wonderful and well and good that we helped with, say, the airport problem, Pearson Airport in Toronto, that one my Director General was mentioning there about fixing the baggage, the inspection process. It can cause a lot of havoc. I had a lot of schedules thrown off because I had to throw everybody off the problem. So if you're really, really good at your job, which is obviously what you're attaining to, get used to having your plans upset because somebody up there more important than you has decided that you're the solution to their problem. Very briefly, I'll talk about this, is that I have a tendency to say, you can say yes, you can say no, but my executive director and I, we are both learning to say either yes, but, or no, but. So rather than just categorically, hey, we can do it, no problem, or no, there's no way that can do that, we're now saying, yes, we can do it, but hey, understand it's going to take this long, or no, but you know what, we can't do it right now, but please, you know what, we can help you out in this way. So just consider that adding the but at the end can actually be a really good thing. And I'll just gosh, I'm running against out of time here, so I'll try to keep moving. So yes, hard power. If you want to keep your COE running, or your organization is not just about the hard power, which is the tangible deliverables. Don't get me wrong, that is super important. You want those KPIs. You want to be able to show you have a 80% reduction in costs or 70% reduction in time to do things. Super awesome. But don't underestimate the hearts and mind part. One of the biggest things that has helped us in the organization was when somebody unbidden would get up in a town hall meeting and say, yes, I've worked with these folks. They actually delivered. They actually in IT, those filthy IT weasels, these folks actually delivered what they said they would do in the time they wanted to do it. The app is great. They're awesome. It really is nice to be able to call in favors or get support from the people who are signing your paychecks when you get that kind of thing into. All right, one last thing. Why am I saying musings for the water park? My first time I got to present at anywhere was at the Power Platform conference down in Florida, not last year, but 2022. And I had the luxury of getting to spend a morning in the water park before I went to present. Why this matters is that, to give you a little background, in 2021, I found out I had stage 4 cancer. It was touch and go. I had to go down to Florida to get surgery very, very quickly. But I'm happy to say I'm still alive. But I went through 7 weeks of radiation. It was not pleasant. That's why I sound like this. It's not because I've been smoking, but I lost like 30 odd bits of parts taken out and all that kind of thing. There is a point to this. I'm sitting there in the water park because it's just about the only ride at that point I can actually do because my body's still recovering. And I realized that it's all about going with the current, or to use another analogy, you got a flight of stairs, go up a couple steps at a time. Nobody's going to be able to jump up a flight of stairs all in one leap over a couple steps at a time. So if it's your COE, if it's your project, don't bite it all all at once. Don't expect that. Start at the bottom, go up piece by piece, get some 100 to 200 to 300 and so forth. you'll get there and you'll get a job done. Anyways, all right, I'm all done because I know we're running a little late on time. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the time that we have left.
Thank you so much. That was great. We did have a few questions in the chat. I think the first question that came in was around when you were talking about assigning the Power Apps Premium user license. So what security role were you assigning to those users?
Okay, what we do at the organization is everybody gets a Power Apps per user license, Power Apps Premium license, and then the roles and rights are assigned at the app level. Basically, our tenant is cleared to protected B. So to the best of my knowledge, I hope I'm answering your question. The security roles are not tied to the license specifically, but it's tied to the app. And then of course we generate the user groups based on the app. So okay. We have one enterprise level app right now called FlexiDesk, which is used for booking office space across the department. That one's universal to the department. That one, everyone would just have a generic access role. So they've been granted nothing higher than that.
So do you assign for your makers, do you assign a standard role to any of your citizen developers, or is that kind of on a as needed basis?
I believe they have local administrative powers on their own apps.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. Again, I apologize. Right. I'm the paper
that
pusher.
Makes sense.
We give them the tools to do their job, and then they can't do anything else. So, for example, It has to be Pace that creates the environments. They can work in the environments once they're in them, but they have no capacity to create their own.
Right. Makes sense. And then the other question that came in, also from Keith, he's like your biggest fan, laughing at all your jokes. And he asked, how long did it take you to deploy the toolkit across your environments?
Has anyone been to Barcelona and seen the Via Sangria, Familia Sangria? We're kind of like that with COE Toolkit. We've got a lot done, but there's always something more to be done. So the initial COE Toolkit, I think we put in about a month and just sort of kicked the tires and turned it on. But it's been ongoing since we first put it in to try and do things, do better. Again, try to be upfront with everybody. We've had to add a bunch of flows to make sure that some of the stuff is more proactive. We've had lots of a struggle where sometimes the flows just stop working. Even the COE supplied flows break from time to time, it seems, for reasons. So it reminds me of a really, really nice used car, right? You bought something like a used Porsche and it's so sexy when it runs, but dang, is the maintenance high. So I hope that answers your question in that, I mean, that's where I think we're at, like I say, the 400 level with this stuff, but we're constantly looking at new ways to either add another feature or to make an existing feature go well.
Right.
Go better or work or keep working.
Right. And I think you can set up the toolkit pretty quickly,
yes.
But it takes a while to actually understand all the data that's there. And then, like you said, you need to do the updates on it. I think they recommend every other month or something like that. Yeah. So
which we have not always done every other month. We were doing every 6 months to have a little more stability. But yes, it's absolutely worth applying. There's people on my team, they're all smarter than I am, but they're still puzzled by some of the things that are in the toolkit. So that's why I was using the Swiss Army knife analogy. Maybe you don't need an ASP or a little tiny little file right now, but that blade's looking pretty darn good. And you know how to use the magnifying glass, right? So don't despair. Pick and choose. It's a buffet. Enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. Get the core things set up and then worry about the rest later.
Core thing for us is monitoring that default tenant. If I was to give any recommendation to folks out there, get the COE kit up and running to support monitoring that default tenant. So then you know what people are up to.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions from our attendees? I don't think we had any other ones in the chat. I don't see anybody coming off of mute. So thank you so much, Douglas. This was great. I know you were worried it wouldn't be technical enough, but right before you joined, some people were talking about needing this in their organization. And so I think this was really helpful and just what our audience needed. There were a few people clapping, sending their reactions. So thank you so much for being here.
I really do appreciate the opportunity. I've had a chance. I met Jamie at the first Power Platform conference I was at. So He's always happy to let me know about these kinds of opportunities. I think he was going to set up the introduction because I got a little oversharing there maybe about my past, but the fact is that, oh, did you? And you still came? I'll take that as a compliment. Good, okay. So, what can I say? My personal thing is that I found out when I was in Orlando. Was it Orlando? Yes, it was. That I can still do this. I only have half my vocal cords, but I can still do this. So as weird as it sounds, this is my personal way of telling cancer to kiss my unusual hairy ass. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this. And the jury is still out whether I'm a masochist or doing this myself or sadist for inflicting myself upon you guys because of my voice and everything else. But I'm still here. So people keep inviting me, so there must be something to it.
You're doing what you love, and that's important.